Quote, thus Negro is used for Indian, not for someone from Africa, end quote.
That the child of an Indian will be known as a mulatto.
And says the selective service draft boards during World War II insisted that these Virginia Indians were Negroes, a small group of Virginia Indians.
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up out of your sleep,
Once again, I need to focus your attention on the 20th century, which is fraught with confused white historians who deemed it necessary to investigate the odd placements of black people in Aboriginal contexts here in the U.S. I've shown you before how this occurred with a historian examining the census taken in a Georgia town where he was surprised to find that Native Americans, quote unquote, were being called colored. But today we're investigating the implications of the first page of an article from historian Paul T. Murray, published in 1987. So what do you make of this title? Who is an Indian? Who is a Negro? Virginia Indians in the World War II Draft. That's the title and subtitle. Why are we yet again finding the entanglement of these same two identities? See, because the fact that this keeps happening means it's not just about two distinct races intermingling. We keep finding this phenomenon because indigenous ethnic groups were black to begin with. But I have to remind you, only 388,747 slaves ever made it to North America, regardless of where they were coming from. So there weren't that many. Yet the 1860 U.S. Census recorded 4.4 million colored people, and most of them were slaves. That's 5 years before emancipation, and since less than 10% came from a foreign land, even slave breeding doesn't explain how this number grew more than tenfold while those same slaves were still being brought here. Keep that in mind while we read this article. It was published by the Virginia Historical Society in the Virginia Magazine of History and Biography. Quote, few Americans have ever had the occasion to ponder deeply these questions. In most cases, the answer is self-evident. A racial label is usually assigned by reference to obvious physical criteria, such as skin color, hair texture, and facial characteristics. But in any multiracial society, there are some people who cannot be neatly placed into one of a limited number of categories. Further, in a society where one's social position depends heavily upon race, resolving questions of racial classification becomes a serious issue. People of mixed race may attempt to improve their position by changing their racial designation. Such an attempt forces government officials to confront directly the delicate issue of the determination of race. Their decisions have far-reaching consequences, not only for the people directly involved, but also for the entire society. During the Second World War, a small group of Virginia Indians challenged the prevailing system of racial classification. When called to register with the selective service system, they listed their race as Indian. Local draft boards, however, would not accept this claim. They recalled that in antebellum days, some of the registrants' ancestors had married free Negroes. Based on this quote-unquote evidence, the boards insisted that the proper classification for all alleged Indians was Negro. The Indians were adamant in refusing this designation. Draft board members were equally determined not to classify the men as Indians because such a classification would mean that they would be sent to military service together with whites. End quote. So the takeaway is that during World War II, which was from 1939 to 1945, Virginia Indians tried to register with the Selective Service System, but the draft boards insisted that they were Negroes. Murray, the author here, uses this word Negro to mean black because he sees Indians as people who aren't black. So he thinks this is a term of distinction in this context. Remember, there's no historian of greater eminence apropos of American Indian history than Jack D. Forbes, who was himself a Lenape Indian. Several times on this channel, we've repeatedly covered the fact that Forbes wrote about how the word Negro, at least in the West, was originally used for American Indians. And mind you, he was specifically a professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is perfect because the Indians we're talking about were Virginia Indians. On page 71 of his book, Africans and Native Americans, The Language of Race and the Evolution of Red Black Peoples, Forbes demonstrated with multiple quotes from the time period that, as he puts it, quote, thus Negro is used for Indian, not for someone from Africa, end quote. He backed that up with several examples right before that. In 1984, Forbes also wrote an essay called The Use of the Terms Negro and Black. In it, he said, quote, the possibility that Native Americans were quite commonly called Negroes is very much supported by Portuguese usage. During the colonial period, Brazilian Indians were repeatedly referred to as Negroes or as Negros da Terra, Negroes of the land, end quote. This is to distinguish the Indians from the Africans. If you jump back to the same book we just looked at and go to page 74, which is just 3 pages after what we read a minute ago, quote, the Terra dos Negros was defined as lying beyond Libya and the Sahara, end quote. This phrase, Terra dos Negros, is Portuguese for land of the Negroes. So if you piece all this together, he's saying that the land of the Negroes is sub-Saharan Africa, but the Negroes of the land in America were American Indians. Why? Because the Portuguese and Spaniards were distinguishing between foreign Negroes and Aboriginal Negroes. There were Negroes already in the Americas, and there were different Negroes being brought from Africa. So you've got the Negroes of the land and the Negroes of Negro land, which is in Africa. And yes, sub-Saharan Africa was genuinely called Negro land for those who think this is just a Portuguese thing to say. The Portuguese called it land of Negroes, Terra dos Negros, and the English called it Negro land. We've shown this map on this channel before as well. An original print of this map went for about $400 at auction through Paulus Swain Gallery in 2021. It's called A New and Accurate Map of Negro Land and the Adjacent Countries. It's a well-known map published in England in 1747 to show European slavers where the specific African targets were for enslavement. You'll see the region is called Negro Land, and when you zoom in on part of it, you find the Slave Coast, the heart of the transatlantic slave trade.
Hey y'all! First of all, like and subscribe to the channel, but also, Unahia is recruiting, and if you don't know what Unahia is, we're a grassroots activist group lobbying Congress to amend a bill to require education and research to acknowledge the Negro origins of Aboriginal groups of North America. If any of you have it to give, please support the campaign using the QR code on your screen, join the campaign with a donation, and if you have the time, you can even join our staff to help guide the organization, not just for this campaign, but also future endeavors. Don't speak about it, be about it. Let's go.
The reason I'm showing you all this is to demonstrate that in 1987, when Paul Murray publishes the article we started with and says the Selective Service draft boards during World War II insisted that these Virginia Indians were Negroes, Murray is not accounting for what the leading historian on the subject had published just 3 years prior about the word Negro being used to describe Indians. He may have been aware of it, but he's using the word the way his audience would understand it, which is to refer to African descendants of the slave trade. So Murray entertains the notion that American Indians mixed with Africans and thereby created a lot of black Indians. But he says the draft board officials refused to let these Indians identify as Indians because of what they looked like. They labeled these men Negroes in a late period when Negro came to mean African. And their evidence that these were Africans was that some Indian tribes had been known to mix with African freedmen. So these white officials in the 1940s decided to run with the assumption that these Virginia Indians weren't Indian because they were dark-skinned with coarse hair. But in 1987, when Murray's writing about this, the part we read doesn't talk about the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which passed 2 decades prior to World War II. In the past, we've discussed this in other videos. House Representative Jim Moran of Virginia told the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs in 2008, quote, "The fact that some of Virginia's ruling elite claimed to be blood descendants of Pocahontas in their view meant that no one else in Virginia could make a claim that they were Native American and a descendant of Pocahontas's people. To do so would mean that Virginia's ruling elite were what they decreed all non-whites to be, part of, quote, the inferior Negroid race. With great hypocrisy, Virginia's ruling elite pushed policies that culminated with the enactment of the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. This act directed state officials and zealots like Walter Plecker to destroy state and local courthouse records and reclassify in Orwellian fashion all non-whites as colored. It targeted Native Americans with a vengeance, denying Native Americans in Virginia their identity. To call yourself a Native American in Virginia was to risk a jail sentence of up to 1 year." End quote. That law codified the legal means for the vital records of black people to be altered so that Negro birth certificates, marriage certificates, and so forth no longer identified them as Indians. In a subsequent hearing on the same subject, Virginia Senator Byron Dorgan also clarified in no uncertain terms that, quote, "the primary target of the racial integrity law was the African American community," end quote. It was about making sure black people couldn't identify as anything more than a color. Murray's article about the Virginia Indians drafted into the military as Africans is just another example of the same thing: reclassification. It's a continuation of the paper genocide meted out against the Indians. But at least we can credit Murray for one thing. He was respectful enough to say, quote, "A small group of Virginia Indians challenged the prevailing system."
And the same thing is true in the British colonies along the Atlantic seaboard. In Virginia in 1705, for instance, the government decrees that the child of an Indian will be known as a mulatto. That is, a person who's half white and Indian, half African and Indian will be a mulatto.
Okay, let me cut you off here because we don't want to keep you here all day. The significance of this being what? What is the lesson? What is this telling us?
Well, there are several things that are significant about it. Of course, one of them is the way that colonialism tries to develop all kinds of elaborate classification terms for different kinds of people. But that's another subject. The most significant thing here is to reveal the much greater amounts of Native American ancestry that are present within the African American population. The much greater amounts of Native American ancestry that are present within the African American population than most people realize, because they might have been misled by the use of terms like mulatto and also people of color.